On August 7th, 2025, Ripple's legal case settled. The SEC agreed. XRP is not a security. It was the most important legal victory in crypto history. 5 days later, the XRP Ledger's daily burn rate, the most direct measure of how much the network is actually being used, was 163 XRP per day. In December 2024, it was 15,000 XRP per day. After the biggest legal win in XRP's history, network usage as measured by fee burn dropped 95%. Not because the technology changed, not because the partnerships collapsed, because the financial institutions that were supposed to rush in didn't. And the on-chain data shows exactly why. Here is why the burn rate collapse is the most honest data point available for understanding XRP's current adoption reality. Every transaction on the XRP ledger destroys a tiny amount of XRP, 0.00001 XRP, irrevocably as a fee. When banks and institutions actually route payments through the XRPL, those payments generate fees, and those fees burn tokens. Burn rate is a direct, manipulation-proof proxy for how much value is actually moving through the network. At peak institutional activity in December 2024, 15,000 XRP burned per day. Post-settlement in September 2025, 163 to 750 XRP per day. A collapse of over 95% in daily burn activity, documented on XRP Scan. RippleNet processes more than $15 billion in cross-border transaction volume per month. But most of that runs through RippleNet messaging and fiat-only settlement, not through XRP, not through the XRPL, and therefore not reflected in the burn rate. The data is not bearish on XRP's thesis. It is precise about where the thesis currently is in its execution. And understanding that precisely is the only way to understand what the Clarity Act actually unlocks. So here is the question that every XRP holder deserves a direct answer to. Only about 40% of RippleNet's 300-plus bank partners are actively using XRP for on-demand liquidity. The other 60%, signed partnerships, working relationships, active messaging, but not using XRP as a settlement asset. That 60% is the adoption that hasn't happened yet. Not because XRP is a bad technology, not because the partners don't understand it, but because one specific barrier remains. What is that barrier? And why does the Clarity Act close it when a federal court ruling didn't? That is what we're mapping today. This is XRP News Flow Signals. We read the on-chain data, the partnership announcements, the regulatory filings, and the legislative record, and we connect them to XRP's price without the narrative layer. Data, not hype. Let's get into it. Let's be exact about the distinction that most XRP analysis collapses, because collapsing it produces wrong conclusions about the adoption timeline. XRP's legal clarity, documented and real. Judge Annalisa Torres ruled in July 2023 that XRP sold on secondary markets is not a security under the Howey test. The SEC case settled August 7, 2025. The SEC and CFTC jointly classified XRP as a digital commodity on March 17, 2026. These are facts. XRP's legal status is clearer today than it has ever been in its history. But XRP has clarity and institutions have clarity are two different sentences. Here is what a bank's compliance and legal team actually needs before they activate XRP in their settlement infrastructure. 1. Regulatory accounting guidance. Under current U.S. banking rules, FASAC 350, SAB 121, banks holding digital assets on behalf of clients must carry the full liability on their balance sheets. That capital treatment makes holding XRP economically punishing for regulated U.S. banks. The Clarity Act creates a new accounting framework that removes this punitive treatment. 2. Risk management framework. For intraday settlement using XRP, where a bank buys XRP, bridges, and sells in 3 to 5 seconds, the bank's risk management team must model and receive board approval for the volatility exposure during that 3 to 5 second window. Without supervisory guidance specifying how to model that risk, approval doesn't come. 3. Supervisory stance. No public rule blocks U.S. banks from using XRP. But bank examiners from the OCC and the Federal Reserve can flag any digital asset activity as an unsafe and unsound practice during an examination, without a formal rule, just based on examiner judgment. Banks do not move until their examiners signal it's acceptable. The Clarity Act changes the supervisory framework formally and signals to examiners that XRP is a regulated commodity. Brad Garlinghouse stated it directly at XRP Las Vegas. He believes if the Clarity Act does not clear the Senate Banking Committee by the end of the third week of May, the bill stalls and XRP faces real challenges in this Congress. That is not Ripple CEO calling for the bill to save XRP. That is Ripple CEO confirming that XRP's court victory is necessary but not sufficient for U.S. institutional adoption at scale. But here's the part most coverage is not connecting. The on-chain data doesn't just show what hasn't happened. It shows exactly what kind of activity would look different if the Clarity Act passes. And that comparison is more telling than any price prediction. That's next. Let's map the current on-chain data precisely, and then build the specific picture of what changes after the Clarity Act. Messari's Q4 2025 report showed payment-type transactions declined 8.1% quarter-over-quarter to 909,000 in Q4 2025, with average daily active addresses of about 49,000. That 49,000 daily active addresses number is the critical data point. In mid-2025, active addresses spiked to 300,000 daily, driven by the price rally and retail ETF interest. After the rally, back to 49,000. Average daily AMM volume on XRPL decreased 24.9% quarter-over-quarter, falling from $1.7 million in Q3 to $1.3 million in Q4 2025. Kaiko's Q3 2025 report placed XRP tied with Ethereum in second place, with an AA score of 95/100. Full marks for liquidity, market depth, exchange availability, institutional adoption, and derivatives maturity. That is asset quality. The on-chain usage data reflects the gap between asset quality and institutional deployment at scale. Now here is what the data would look like if the 60% of messaging-only RippleNet partners converted to ODL-active. ODL processed more than $15 billion of cross-border payments in 2024, a 32% year-over-year increase, with Asia-Pacific accounting for roughly 56% of volume. That is 40% of RippleNet partners producing $15 billion annually. If 60% converted, even at half the per-partner volume, total ODL volume would triple or quadruple. Every ODL transaction requires XRP to be purchased at source and sold at destination. That is direct, structural buy and sell pressure on XRP. At triple ODL volume, daily burn rate returns toward 5,000 to 10,000 XRP. Daily active addresses expand as institutional treasury teams route payments through XRPL infrastructure. Payment transaction counts climb past 1 million daily consistently. The NVT ratio, currently above 300, signaling price-to-utility disconnect, falls below 300 and approaches equilibrium. That is what on-chain adoption at institutional scale looks like. The Clarity Act is the specific regulatory event that converts the 60% messaging-only partners into ODL-active. And here's the catch that most bullish coverage won't say directly, because it requires being honest about the specific geography of the problem. The institutional adoption that exists already, almost none of it is in the United States. And that distinction matters enormously for the price. That's next. Let's map where Ripple's institutional partnerships actually are, because the geography tells the whole story about why U.S. regulatory clarity produces a price event when global regulatory clarity has not. Outside the U.S., extremely active. K-Bank, South Korea. Phase 2 ODL pilot live. Deutsche Bank, Germany. Swift Ripple Bridge, not US domiciled. Aviva Investors, UK. Tokenization Partnership, XRPL Fund Structures. Kyobo Life, South Korea. Insurance Company Integration. SBI Holdings, Japan. $64.5 million on-chain bond. Visa crypto card launched May 1st. BNY Mellon announced USD custody, RLUSD, not XRP token. Franklin Templeton, Singapore, money market fund on XRPL. Inside the US, limited XRP active activity, 7 spot XRP ETFs. These are investors buying exposure, not infrastructure. SoFi Bank, accepting XRP deposits. 1 US bank, significant milestone. Canara Bank concept, still in evaluation. Brad Garlinghouse confirmed this observation. U.S. financial institutions have not yet adopted XRP infrastructure at the scale global partners have. Why does the U.S. specifically matter for XRP's price? Global cross-border payment volumes range from $130 trillion to $150 trillion annually, according to Swift-linked estimates. Even $30 billion in annual ODL volume is meaningful for XRP, but marginal for global payments. The U.S. financial system holds approximately 40% of global investment assets. U.S. bank balance sheets represent the majority of global institutional correspondent banking volume. U.S. pension funds, 401k providers, and endowments control approximately $40 trillion in assets. If U.S. institutions enter at scale, under a Clarity Act statutory framework, the capital available for XRP demand is categorically different from the global but non-U.S. adoption that currently exists. This is why the Clarity Act, and specifically the U.S. institutional compliance gateway it creates, produces a price event when an international partnership announcement doesn't. If you're tracking this kind of honest, data-driven analysis, the on-chain reality combined with the institutional mechanics. Subscribe to XRP News Flow Signals right now. This is what we build every week, the signal behind the signal. The button is right there. Let's close with the only question that actually matters right now. What happens to the on-chain data the week after the Clarity Act signs? Not months, not years, the week after signing. Project Crypto is ready. SEC Chair Paul Atkins confirmed it at Bitcoin 2026. The implementation infrastructure is built. Rulemaking begins within weeks, not years. Here's the specific compliance chain that activates. Week 1, accounting guidance changes. SAB 121, the punitive balance sheet treatment for digital asset custody, is superseded by the Clarity Act's commodity custody framework. U.S. bank compliance teams immediately remove the primary accounting barrier. Week 2 through 4, supervisory stance shifts. The OCC issues guidance confirming XRP as a regulated commodity under the Clarity Act framework. Bank examiners receive updated examination guidance. The unsafe and unsound risk of flagging XRP activity transforms into a supervised commodity use case. Month 2. RippleNet messaging-only partners begin ODL evaluation. The 60% of RippleNet partners using messaging-only initiate internal compliance review for ODL activation. This process takes 60 to 90 days on average. The pipeline fills. Month 3 through 6. First major U.S. bank ODL announcements. Bank of America, with 83 blockchain patents, including Ripple-compatible architecture. JP Morgan's Onyx settlement team with documented XRPL compatibility. Private pilots that Kevin O'Leary and institutional sources confirm are underway, but not yet announced because the supervisory environment hasn't cleared. The on-chain burn rate begins recovering toward 5,000 plus XRP per day. Payment transactions climb past 1 million daily consistently. Active addresses expand as institutional settlement flows begin. NVT ratio falls toward equilibrium. Brad Garlinghouse's third week of May deadline. If the Clarity Act clears committee by May 21st, the Senate floor vote follows in June, and signatures and implementation follow in June or July. The institutional on-ramp begins before summer ends. Here is what the honest data picture looks like as of May 3rd, 2026. XRP won in court on August 7th, 2025. The burn rate collapsed 95% in the months following that win. That data is not a failure signal. It is a precision signal. It tells you exactly which door is still closed and exactly what key opens it. The door, U.S. Institutional Compliance Framework. The key, Clarity Act as permanent federal statute. The timeline, markup week of May 11th. Floor vote, June-July. 40% of RippleNet's 300-plus bank partners use XRP for ODL actively. The other 60% use messaging only. That 60% is waiting for the supervisory environment to clear. No rule blocks them. Examiner judgment does. The Clarity Act changes examiner judgment by making XRP's commodity classification permanent in statute. The burn rate dropped from 15,000 XRP per day in December 2024 to 163 to 750 XRP per day by September 2025. That is the metric that tells you institutional adoption hasn't activated yet. And it's the metric that will tell you unambiguously when it has. The most important number to watch in the week after the Clarity Act signs. Not the XRP price. The daily XRP burn rate. When that number starts climbing back toward 5,000, the institutional settlement machine has started. And when it crosses 10,000, heading toward the December 2024 peak, the on-chain data confirms what the price will already be reflecting. This is XRP news flow signals. Data, not hype. Every time. Disclaimer, nothing in this video constitutes financial advice. All information is for educational purposes only. Always conduct your own research and consult a qualified professional before making any investment decisions.